Hello everybody, it's Chris. Thank you as always for watching Comic Tropes, and the imminent release of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 got me thinking about a lot of those characters. There's one guy that created or co-created characters like Drax, Gamora, Thanos, and he did so much more in comics as both a writer and an artist. He wrote Marvel Comics' first ever graphic novel. Over at DC, he wrote a lot of great Batman stories, including A Death in the Family, where the second Robin, Jason Todd, was actually killed off. Spoilers for a story from the 80s. And he did so much to grow Marvel's cosmic side. Silver Surfer, Adam Warlock, all the guys that ended up in Guardians of the Galaxy. Well, the guy behind a lot of that is Jim Starlin. He got his start in comics in the early 70s and just loved doing stories that explored the metaphysical, the cosmic. He liked looking at things like religion and death and really examining those in a very serious way, even though the comics themselves could be full of pulpy adventure. He took a lot of those topics very seriously, and there were some very hefty stakes to his story that gave it weight, emotional weight, resonance. I'm really impressed by a lot of Jim Starlin's work. Well, in 1988 or so, he started writing Silver Surfer and began building up this amazing story that eventually culminated in a 6-issue miniseries called The Infinity Gauntlet, in which Thanos became a threat to all the superheroes that we know in the Marvel Universe. It was fantastic. It was such a great, fun story. It was well received both with the fans, with critics. It did great. Of course, the following year, in '92, they came out with a sequel series, The Infinity War. It was okay. It was pulpy, good fun. And then they decided to push their luck a bit, and they came out with The Infinity Crusade. And you know what? It's the clunker of the trilogy. We're going to dive deep into this. Let's look at Infinity Crusade #1, taking a special look towards Jim Starlin's tropes. I'm reading the issue digitally through the Marvel Unlimited app, so I unfortunately can't hold up the cover and show you the reflective chromium cover, but yeah, I've talked before in my 90s excess video. I've talked about crossovers and events in my Why Civil War II Doesn't Work video. This is yet another event comic, and they felt the need to overcharge us for this issue. I bought it back in '93. It had a chromium foil cover over it. There was some gold in it, and it let them charge us another $1 or $2 over what we would normally spend. Thanks. Anyway, let's just get past that. I don't want to talk necessarily about event stuff this time. Let's just read the story. The story begins with the main character of this event, Adam Warlock, just sort of brooding and looking out into the sky, thinking about what he wants to do. There's a lot of text talking about how much he senses a change coming but doesn't quite understand exactly what it is. And there's an interesting quote up in the top left corner by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It says, "There lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds." We've got 2 tropes right off the bat. First of all, he's using Adam Warlock, his favorite go-to protagonist, and second, there's some poetry there. He loved using either his own poetic language or a quote from a famous poet, as is used in this instance. So, that quote, I think what he's trying to say there is sort of setting up the theme of these 6 issues, which is probably muddled in its overall execution, but it's still a good idea. He's saying that there's more honesty in the amount of doubt that people have than in their sort of faith in any religion out there. Because this story is very much about religion and faith of all kinds, and sort of how it can actually be perverted, organized religion. We're going to dig deeper into that, but for now, let me just talk real quick about Adam Warlock. Adam Warlock was not a character that Jim Starlin created. Somebody else did, I forget who off the top of my head, I'll put it down here. And he was a genetically created, sort of uber human. He was created to be sort of a perfect human. And he was originally called Him. He sort of grew in his knowledge and his cosmic awareness. He was sort of in touch with big cosmic events, and he evolved and he went out into the stars. He really left humanity behind. He was, to a degree, a Christ-like figure, which is probably a lot of the appeal where Jim Starlin picked him up in the 70s and really defined who Adam Warlock is, which is sort of the existentialist superhero. A guy who is constantly aware of these big changes coming and isn't necessarily sure how he should address them. He's almost like Hamlet. He's got all this power that he could affect things, and sometimes he does, but sometimes he can be a very passive protagonist. Keep that in mind. On the next page, we meet the 5 members of Adam Warlock's team, known as the Infinity Watch, because they each protect one of the Infinity Gems. We've got Drax the Destroyer, Maxim, Pip the Troll, Gamora, and Moondragon. The Infinity Watch team was a creation of Jim Starlin's. It was a comic book that was going on right at this time following this team, and their responsibility was each of them guarded one of the Infinity Gems. In the Marvel movies, those are called the Infinity Stones. Each one controls some aspect like power, time, the mind. In the comics, following the events of the Infinity Gauntlet, Adam Warlock decided that he would pick the perfect person to watch out for each of these gems. And so each of them just sort of watched out to keep it out of enemy hands, to keep somebody from gathering them all together. Although I seriously have to question whether it makes any sense to have all the gems in one place, basically. The entire team, if they got beaten by somebody out there, that's a pretty big threat. That would basically allow someone to take over the entire universe. But all these characters except for Moondragon are created or co-created by Jim Starlin. It's quite a wide array of characters, and it really speaks to his creativity. While the team trains, Adam Warlock walks away and he's lost in his own thoughts. The narration boxes that we see are actually from the point of view of somebody that's spying on him somehow. And it talks about how Adam Warlock is caught up with his sort of existentialism. It says, even now you formulate plans on how to deal with the danger your cosmic senses barely even perceive. Your first step naturally is to consult one who knows all and misses nothing. A vain effort, a truth you'll soon come to learn. Adam is caught up in this existential angst, and he just basically storms off to his room doing nothing. He feels sort of like a moody teenager. Fine, I'll clean my room, but I don't see the point. Adam meditates, and eventually he comes face to face with eternity, the living embodiment of the entire universe. That's a trope. This guy is able to commune with everything all at once. Now, Jim Starlin hadn't created the idea of eternity. That goes to Steve Ditko. He created him in Doctor Strange. But Jim Starlin loved using these cosmic characters that Marvel had and really trying to embellish them a little bit, giving them a little bit of personality and nuance. And, unfortunately for Adam, Eternity is pretty much in the same boat. He's like, yeah, I do sort of sense that something huge is coming along, some sort of cosmic change, but I've determined that it doesn't really affect me, so I don't really care about it. Who can blame him? He's beyond godlike. Eternity is everything. So he's really not plugged in too much to what one living person thinks or cares about. Eternity basically blows Adam off, saying, each microsecond has varying degrees of importance and are granted appropriate attentiveness. Meaning this meeting obviously is not a high priority. And one no longer worth continuing. Myriad duties beckon. Farewell. Wait! But before Adam can ask him any more questions, he's greeted by a glowing woman who says that she is the goddess. Adam's reaction goes from confusion to amusement to anger, as he realizes that the goddess is not quite what she seems. The story explains who she is in the next panel, but to get the full benefit, you really do unfortunately have to have read the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity War before this, before the Infinity Crusade. That sort of necessity to read previous stories just to get the full emotional impact of this one, it kind of makes it the Superman 3 or the X-Men The Last Stand of the trilogy. It's not the strongest. The goddess explains that she is the opposition of all of Adam's dark impulses. She is the goddess, the flame, self-awareness, and feminine. And you are now but a memory, and she casts Adam away. And then we get this close-up of her lips smiling. I'm not going to do the artist Ron Lim's tropes, but let's count how many close-up mouths we get. Just a panel basically focusing on a mouth. That's one. The goddess is growing her own religion, and we're about to see that in greater detail. But this focus on religion is one of Jim Starlin's tropes. And again, to truly understand all of this, you do have to have read the previous issues. But allow me to summarize briefly. In the Infinity Gauntlet, Adam Warlock briefly possessed all of the Infinity Gems, and he was everything. He controlled the entire universe, but he somehow was special enough that he could reject that power. And he did something interesting that we learned in the Infinity War. He expelled both his good and evil personality. He used the Infinity Gauntlet to expel that out of him. And unfortunately, it manifested physically in the Infinity War. His evil self is known as the Magus. And the Magus had appeared in previous comics as a potential future version of Adam Warlock that had created an evil church that was purely used to enslave minds. So the Magus was his evil side. The Infinity Crusade focuses on what is supposedly his good side. And the reason Adam did this is he thought he could make rational decisions if he expelled his good and evil impulses. Probably a flawed decision, obviously, since it led to two huge cosmic events where all the superheroes have to fight. But, you know, it makes a type of logic. So over the next several pages, a lot of superheroes look up into the sky and they see a symbol of their faith glowing in the sky. This is the actions of the goddess. Some of them make sense. Living Lightning is an Avenger. He looks up and sees the Christian cross. Makes sense. Another one that makes sense is we see Namorita, Namor's cousin. She sees the trident of Poseidon. And it had been established in the past that the Atlanteans worship Poseidon, the Greek god. So that's fair. We know that these people have this religion. But then there's two that are a little more confusing. We learn that the Canadian superhero Sasquatch is Jewish as he looks up at the Star of David. At least that's somewhat fair. We knew that his name was Walter Langowski. Sounds like it could be Jewish, so this isn't a huge revelation per se, but it is kind of funny that he looks up in the sky, sees the Star of David, and he's just sort of like, yep, I'm in. And the Black Knight is an Avenger. He's flying over New York City, and he looks up into the sky and sees the Holy Grail? The Black Knight had a sword that was inherited through his family line from medieval times, but he himself lives in the modern day and he's never expressed any particular interest in the medieval crusades. Him looking up and seeing that old goblet in the sky and instantly going like, yep, that's what I worship. That's basically akin to like if Ant-Man looked up in the sky, saw a glowing ant and was like, that's what I worship, I'm in. It only gets more confusing. Hercules looks up into the sky and sees a lightning bolt. But Hercules doesn't worship Zeus. He knows that his father literally exists within this comic book universe. Storm looks up and sees an Ankh, which is a little confusing. Storm constantly says goddess when she's surprised. That's her exclamation, goddess. So we sort of always had an idea that she was religious of some sort. She also spent a fair amount of time living in Africa using her powers to bring rain to people in the desert like Serengeti. But that's nowhere near Egypt, where they used the Ankh to worship Egyptian gods. I mean, I guess Storm could worship the Egyptian gods. I don't know. It seems like a little bit of a stretch. Okay. And then Cersei, she's an Avenger who's an Eternal. That's sort of a super advanced, almost godlike race of humans who've been around for millennia. She apparently worships ovals? From there, we cut to the goddess in some sort of dark place. She touches a cosmic box, and some sort of evil being vanishes. This is all very metaphysical, but let's take a look at the end of this sequence. Yup, we've got another Ron Lim mouth. Over the next several panels, we also see Marvel's version of the devil, Mephisto, is watching these events. And he realizes that trouble is coming for him and he's going to need allies. Now, Mephisto is actually not the only version of the devil in Marvel Comics. A version of some sort of guy that lives in hell and captures souls. No, we've got guys like, there's Lucifer, there's Marduk Kurios. He's the father of Damien Hellstorm, also known as the son of Satan. There was Chthon, there was Beelzebul, there was Satanish, and there's plenty more. So this is just a small hint at another Jim Starlin trope. Death. Obviously, Mephisto collects souls, and so that's a little bit of a cheat here, but I do want to talk about death as it relates to Jim Starlin's work, because I feel that that topic is one that absolutely interests and fascinates him, and he treats it with quite a bit of sincerity, a bit of weight. It's a very permanent thing. I mentioned at the top of this episode that Jim Starlin wrote Marvel's first graphic novel. That was called The Death of Captain Marvel. And it was a really interesting story where he wrote that Captain Marvel, as amazing and powerful as he was, he got cancer. And the cancer ultimately beat him. And it was a very poignant and realistic take on someone fighting cancer but succumbing to it. And they being Marvel Comics, has pretty much played fair with that. They have not brought Captain Marvel back since he died from cancer. There have been stories with maybe time travel or something like that where you get to see Captain Marvel again, but they haven't brought him back to life. His death counts, in other words. When somebody goes away, that's it. And I think Jim Starlin plays pretty fair with that idea, minus a few cosmic ideas where he can play with that a little bit. It's also worth noting that Thanos, his most popular co-creation, is a supervillain literally in love with death. We saw at the beginning of this story how Adam Warlock talked to the physical embodiment of eternity. There's also a physical embodiment of death, and Thanos is in love with death. He wants to kill off massive swaths of the universe to win her love. Anyway, death is definitely a topic that seems to fascinate Jim Starlin. Going back to the story, we see what worries Mephisto so much. The goddess has grabbed these cosmic cubes from several alternate dimensions, and she uses them to reshape herself. Also, after she does that and gives herself a cool set of new armor, we've got another Ron Lim close-up on her lips. That's the third one for anybody counting at home. So the goddess is, to a degree, I think, a huge influence on the character of Aisha in the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 movie. That name, Aisha, was actually the name of a female version of Adam Warlock. However, I think the personality was based on the goddess. Both of them obviously are female representations of who Adam Warlock is. But after Adam Warlock was created, that same super scientist enclave group created a guy named Paragon. Paragon started off as a villain, but then he sort of came to realize that his purpose hadn't quite been figured out. He went back into a cocoon and emerged as a woman called Her, which might make him the first, possibly only, trans superhero that I know about, although he literally swapped genders there. Yeah, and she went by her, she went by the name Kismet, she went by the name Aisha, but she was basically a superhero, a female version of Adam Warlock, whereas Adam Warlock's good side that became the goddess, I think that that's way closer to the personality of the character Aisha in the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 movie. Adam Warlock is unconscious, and in a white void, a shape approaches him and a purple glove reaches out to touch him, saying, "What have we here?" Now, we don't learn who that is in this issue. We have to wait till the next issue, but spoiler, it's Thanos. Obviously, Jim Starlin's most popular co-creation. Although he might deserve a little bit more credit than just co-creator. He was drawing and plotting Iron Man at the time, but somebody else did scripting duties when Thanos first appeared. But Jim Starlin wrote the vast majority of Thanos' stories following that, gave him his personality. Now, the fact is, to a large extent, he was based on Darkseid, the villain in DC Comics created by Jack Kirby. He's kind of a new version of an evil god, but for Marvel. He even kind of looks the same. But I think that Thanos, after his creation, went off on a very different path from Darkseid. Yet, there's definitely similarities. They're evil gods that are looking for a way to kill off the universe. So, there's a lot of similarities there. Darkseid came first. Now we get a couple pages of ordinary people around the planet Earth looking up into the sky, and some of them see symbols, but people that are right next to them clearly do not see the same thing. Also worth noting, we've got another Ron Lim close-up of a mouth. That's 4. Now we cut to upstate New York at the X-Men's mansion. Storm and Wolverine are both in some sort of a computer room. Wolverine is complaining, saying, "Don't see why you want me to come up with a new program for the game room, Aurora." By game room, I guess he must mean the danger room? Close. And Storm answers, "Who better to ask, Logan, than our resident expert in mayhem?" Who better? Oh, you know what? I know. A computer programmer. A computer programmer might do a better job than Wolverine. Storm is shocked when the goddess herself appears in front of her, and the goddess says, "Yes, he's completely unaware of my presence. Not even your comrade's ultra-sharp senses can detect me." So they have a conversation. The goddess talks about how Storm is religious and she wants to recruit her, but that Wolverine can't see her because he's a non-believer. And Wolverine says, "Aurora?" But then he just sort of stands around while Jean Grey and Archangel also walk in, and Wolverine must just stand by the side while the goddess goes on and on about what her holy work will be. Oh, and look at that next panel. That's 5 Ron Lim close-up mouths that we've got. 5. Not bad. From there, the goddess approaches Sue Storm, the Invisible Woman of the Fantastic Four, and says, "The only thing you've had to see through these trying times is your little spoken of faith." And Sue Storm breaks down crying, saying, "Yes, it's been so hard." What a depressing reveal. Sue Storm is religious, but she's felt the need to hide it from her super scientist husband and family? That's just awful. That's worse than the terrible costume she's wearing with the boob window. Wow. The goddess then approaches Daredevil, and that makes sense because we've always known he's very Catholic. She approaches Namorita, who we've seen before, as well as her fellow New Warrior, Silhouette. Yeah, you all remember Silhouette, right? Ah, popular Silhouette. We just can't seem to get enough books about Silhouette. And then she recruits Spider-Man. I kind of got to call bullshit there. I think that some of these characterizations are way out of character. Peter Parker, he's never shown any interest in religion. He's kind of a science nerd, if anything. I have a hard time believing that he's in any way religious. That seems out of character to me. I think that Invisible Woman feels very out of character. Now, I think that who they should have probably used in the Fantastic Four is The Thing. I think that Jack Kirby thought of the Thing as Jewish, like himself. Supposedly, Jack Kirby kept a drawing that he did of the Thing above his mantle in his home, and the Thing had on a yarmulke and held a copy of the Torah. So, at least to Jack Kirby, Thing was Jewish. And yet, in issue 3 of this series, a scene plays out where Thing talks about sort of an uncle dying, and he's very clearly at a Christian cemetery. So in the comics, Thing had not been explicitly defined as Jewish at this point. That happened around 2002. They finally defined him as Jewish, which I guess means this doesn't 100% fit, but whatever. I think that Jim Starlin had a great grasp on characters like Silver Surfer, Adam Warlock, a lot of the cosmic characters. But he was obligated to insert all the Marvel superheroes, and I don't think he had a great grasp on all of them. So I think that there are moments that are kind of out of character. That's probably the kind of thing that an editor should come in on and say, you know what, instead of using this character, use this character, or change this, modify that. Just my opinion, my 2 cents. The Goddess recruits Quicksilver. That's a stretch. She goes after Doctor Strange. Well, he's in touch with the supernatural. That makes a type of sense. She recruits Wonder Man. Now, that's actually a really interesting idea. Wonder Man had literally died and come back to life. So it's not just people that follow a particular religion, it's people that are connected to the supernatural or have experienced death and come back. That helps also explain Archangel in the previous scene. So characters that have died and come back sort of have supposedly some sort of connection that she can exploit. I think that that's a little bit interesting. She recruits Captain America, fine, that makes sense. Then she recruits all of Alpha Flight, saying, Puck, Shaman, Talisman, Windshear, and Sasquatch, you are strong souls who would sacrifice your all for the collective good of humanity. Oh, you mean like every other superhero? The Goddess also gets Silver Surfer, Thor, Cersei, and Sleepwalker. Great, Sleepwalker. He'll be really useful if you ever need to make children cry by looking at his ugly face. Sleepwalker, for when Stingray and Airwalker are busy. Sleepwalker, his floating at night powers will really come in handy when the Goddess launches the hot air balloon phase of her plan. The Goddess recruits Crystal the Inhuman, Hercules, Fire Lord, the one-time Herald of Galactus, and Moondragon from the Infinity Watch. And apparently Moondragon likes to take naps in her bikini superhero outfit. Oh, and don't worry, she also got US Agent. So with Sleepwalker and US Agent, I mean, how could her side lose? Then she goes to X Factor and recruits Wolfsbane and... wait a minute. Duplicate Man? Duplicate Man? Jamie Madrox has always been known as Multiple Man. Nowhere else in any Marvel comic has he ever been called Duplicate Man. And I don't think you get points for close enough. So can the Goddess just rename superheroes as she sees fit? Because Sleepwalker and US Agent could probably use a hand. The Goddess goes on to recruit Scarlet Witch, Black Knight, and Gamora? Gamora the Assassin. Sure, I guess Punisher will be next on her list. All of these superheroes immediately pledge their loyalty, reaching towards the Goddess, and in this splash page image, I especially like the two fingers Sasquatch is pointing, and Gamora's odd pose where she throws one arm behind her back. In the next page, each of these superheroes walks through a portal and vanishes, often right in front of their teammates. The following page starts with a close-up panel of some lips. That's 6 Ron Lim mouths. He might be going for a record here. Vision from the Avengers contacts the Fantastic Four. They're looking into the sudden disappearance of their comrades. Pretty soon, other superheroes are brought in. We see the X Factor, Iron Man, the Hulk, they're all brought in. The Vision explains, several groups and individuals are already on their way here. The Avengers have invited basically every superhero they know to gather into one place. They're all going to figure this out together. Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four is pretty much the smartest of all the superheroes, and he could probably figure out what's going on, but unfortunately, he suddenly vanishes. We cut to Avengers Mansion, where all the superheroes that were not abducted are gathering. They've got a list. They're already figuring out who is missing. There's a weird little drawing in the bottom left corner by Ron Lim where Iceman trips Speedball, who apparently plants his face between She-Hulk's boobs. Is that something that Jim Starlin wrote into this cosmic script, or was Ron Lim getting bored and was just like, I gotta draw this for me? The Vision explains that he's come up with a working theory for the people that have vanished. He says, I feel confident I know why these particular paranormals were abducted. All the missing share a common trait or experience, an event or attitude that might be characterized as religious. So the Vision figured that pattern out really fast. I would love to see this guy play some video games. But Beast points out, hey, I believe there's a God. Why didn't I get snatched along with the others? The Beast believes in God. Okay, well, congrats. This is the only time he ever mentions that. Vision says that maybe he doesn't believe deeply enough. You know, sure, that works. In some ways, I wonder if they literally just threw a dart at character names on a wall and were just like, these guys get recruited, these guys don't. Now we've got two sides. Done. Human Torch points out that Reed is also abducted, but the Vision says that he was probably abducted by somebody else. And the Vision basically argues Reed is just too much of a pragmatist to be religious, so he doesn't fit the profile. He was abducted by somebody else. Oh. Great, another mystery, thanks. We have scenes of Iron Man, Vision, Hulk, Cyclops, all talking about what to do next, but nobody's really making a plan at this point. And I think that this is a part of the problem for Infinity Crusade as an event. There's no leader at the center of this. Captain America and Reed Richards are kind of the natural leaders of a big group of superheroes, but both of them are missing for most of this story, or at least not on the side of the good guys. And Adam Warlock is a bit of a passive character and is sort of going on his own side journey for at least the first 2/3 of this overall story. So a lot of the superheroes are just sort of deciding things by committee. So they're just this amorphous blob of superpowered beings, but no one's like in charge and saying like, you guys go on this mission, you guys figure this part out, you scout out ahead. None of that's happening. It's just a big team of superheroes ready to punch the other superheroes. It's not that interesting. It's very straightforward. There's no twists or turns to that. The Hulk points out that maybe they should be looking for Adam Warlock for answers, since this is somewhat similar to events that they've already experienced. But Cyclops says, we'd be glad to once you tell us how. Besides, the circumstances of these vanishings differ greatly from the past ones. And then the Hulk immediately agrees and says, not to mention the fact that everyone's playing old Purple Puss isn't involved this go-around. And Charles Xavier shows up for one line saying, precisely. Nobody in his right mind should want to confront Thanos again if it can be avoided. And we have a very unfortunate page layout where Ron Lim has a close-up on Professor Xavier's eyes, followed by yet another close-up of lips, the goddess's lips. It makes it look like this is a noseless fish monster. Seven close-ups on lips. The goddess uses her seemingly unlimited cosmic powers to build a new planet, a paradise-like world, and all of the religious superheroes pop up on it. They look forward, and a massive temple is erected. The goddess herself eventually emerges from it and says, welcome my children to Paradise Omega. That's the story, that's the setup. It's going to be one team of superheroes versus another team of superheroes, and obviously the religious or good guys are sort of being misled down a certain path. That's because the goddess really has a lot of trouble figuring out how do you eliminate all evil. How do you eliminate evil? Because everybody has good and evil within them. Well, I believe her ultimate solution was eliminate all sentient life in the galaxy. So that did not go well for her. But look at how this story ends. Oh, talk about event comics bloat. We have 2 narration boxes telling us what we should read next. To be continued in the Warlock Chronicles #1, on sale next week. Then the adventure continues 2 weeks later within the pages of Warlock and the Infinity Watch #18. And the following week, rejoin us here for the Infinity Crusade #2. And be sure not to miss the exciting developments in Avengers West Coast #96, Alpha Flight #122, Iron Man #294, Thor #464, Doctor Strange #55, and Terror Inc. #13. Terror Inc. had to be included as a tie-in issue. I guess US1 and Billy Ray Cyrus were busy that month. So I picked a not great issue to look at some of Jim Starlin's tropes. We came across about 7 hallmarks you could find in many of his Marvel Comics stories. And a lot of them would also be accurate to find in his DC comics or his self-published comics work. He's done Dreadstar, which is sort of more like a more metaphysical Star Wars. It's a space opera type of thing. He loves doing stuff like that, but he's written down-to-earth stuff like Batman and done some fantastic issues there. Jim Starlin is sincerely a writer and an artist that I really enjoy for the most part, and he's still very busy in comics. Just last year, he wrote another Infinity type story, or it had Infinity in the title, and it was about Thanos. He loves his characters, and I appreciate that he loves his characters. He has a lot of passion. I think that this was just editorially mandated. He'd had a huge success with Infinity Gauntlet. Infinity War also did very well, even though it didn't have as much build-up or payoff. But Infinity Crusade, it was a clunker. And I don't really blame Jim Starlin. It's like he didn't have time to build up a new story. He just sort of had to weld new parts on top of what had already come before. So he didn't really get to do the building to get up to the payoff. Anyway, not my favorite, but I do recommend a lot of his work. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And until next week, keep reading comics.